Hey everyone, so I wrote down some goals regarding my fashion sense in the long term and short term, and I'm going to tell you why this is important and why it should be important to you, whether in your career, whether in your dating life, whether in general in terms of meeting people, and so forth. And this is coming from a guy who, for the great majority of his life, didn't care a thing about fashion. I grew up in a family where my parents had pretty bad fashion sense, and on top of that, money was a bit of an issue, so I viewed clothing as just something that you'd be lucky to have if it was on your back. Obviously, because I was around other classmates, I had general tendencies to like understand that this type of fashion is pretty awesome and I wish I could have it. But generally, for the most part, my focus was mainly on school academics and those sorts of results. So every day when I would wake up in the morning, I would literally just throw on whatever was closest to me and then go to school. Oftentimes, I wouldn't even splash water on my face. I wouldn't even look in the mirror. And this habit has been something that's been for most of my life. So let's start with some of these goals, and I'll tell you why they're important to me and why they should be to you. Some are kind of common sense, and I can start working on immediately. So let's get rid of those first. Good hygiene. And what by good hygiene I mean the hair must be combed, nothing is in the teeth, the nose is free of boogers, all these standard things. Now, for most of you guys, it's probably just very easy. Oftentimes, I thought I wasn't a problem at all. So I wouldn't even wake up and look at myself in the mirror. Sometimes I would. But more and more, I started to realize that this was a huge problem. Because I would go to events, I would go to school, I would walk into a room, maybe I would approach a girl, and everything was just retarded on my face. My hair was sticking up in all sorts of directions. It didn't make any sense. It seemed like I was homeless or I just got out of bed. And again, my face was oftentimes covered in like tiny bits of God knows what stuff from sleeping. And then you have those like crinkly things, I don't know what you call them, in your eyes that you don't brush out. And it goes on and on. And a huge problem I had was with boogers. So this was something that became a huge problem. And it got to a point where even if I checked myself in the mirror, an hour later, especially if I had a runny nose and it was winter time, there'd be massive amounts of boogers sticking out. And it was horrible and it was so embarrassing. And I guess people don't want to mention it, so they're grossed out, but they don't want to say anything. And it was just a horrible experience. So checking up on your grooming is very important, and all those things add together to the picture. It's one of those things that I think people just generally, like, if they see you and they just see your appearance and it's below par, and I was below par in a lot of areas, below average in terms of all these areas, they're not even going to give you a chance because they may think like, if this person can't even take care of himself, or if this person is so sloppy, what is the rest of his life like? And for me, I always had thought that, okay, fashion and all that stuff is a waste of time. It can lead to decision fatigue. I have to work on all these other areas of my life and excel at them. Why waste an hour every morning getting ready? And now I'm starting to realize that you don't have to go to that extreme. Some people do, but unless I make fashion my career, 15 minutes in the morning can't hurt you. I remember talking to this one girl and she had a pretty awesome outfit on and she was all done up, and I asked her how long it took for her to put that all together, and she just said 15 minutes in the morning, and I was amazed. It was also very similar to a man I met at a gym a year ago, and he was beyond jacked. He had the model face, six-pack abs, and he was toned. He wasn't like Arnold Schwarzenegger jacked, but he was toned. He would have fit in a movie very well, and he was a standard white guy, huge pecs, huge muscles, and so forth. And I asked him, well, how did you do it? And he said, consistency. I spent 30 minutes to an hour every day, and I've been doing it for over 15 years. And he was like 27 at the time. So that's something to keep in mind. Oftentimes we go to the gym, we binge exercise for 2 hours, or we do 1 week work of exercise and then we just stop and get lazy and we don't do it. I see it all the time, and I'm a culprit of that. So my next goal is to have clothing that looks good. However, this clothing cannot be too flashy, high maintenance, expensive, or name brand. So let me just explain to you the reasoning behind that and where I came from. So my clothing for the longest time has generally been below average. And because the world's so big, I see a lot of people like me, gamers, nerds, who don't spend a lot of time with clothing. And perhaps I use that as a bit of okay, I'm not that bad. But honestly, looking back, it has probably been to my disadvantage for sure in numerous situations. I've worn very ridiculous clothing. I'll show you an example. I have this really baggy red coat here, and it's much too big for me, and it covers most of my body, and it's very baggy, and it's just like kind of red, but it's kind of purple. I mean, not purple, pink. And it's just a good example of what the stuff I tended to wear. I grabbed whatever I had and I put it on. And therefore, when I would go into a room, or I would approach a girl, or people would just see me, my fashion sense would be non-existent. And this probably closed a lot of doors and prevented me from even getting the foot in the door. I'm sure there are situations where the girl was so put off by my fashion initially that she didn't give me a chance to express my personality and so forth. And so that coat is a great example of what I wore, and I still kind of wear. I just grab whatever I have, and as long as it keeps me warm, I don't care what I look like. And sure, girls do that too. Sometimes they don't feel like dressing up and so forth. But I do think a certain level of above average fashion sense would do me very well in a lot of situations. You come in and already you're showing, at least on one level, that you're presentable, that you understand the situation, that you value a certain standard of fashion. And my whole case about not going over the top and high maintenance and all that stuff has to do a lot about how I live my life, the books I've read in personal finance, and the values I have, the type of people I want in my life, and a bunch of things. So let me explain this to you. I don't want to be exceptionally high maintenance and only wear name brands that everyone recognizes, because one, it just screams, oh, look at all these expensive pieces of clothing I have, and it can draw in the wrong crowd. It can draw in people who immediately only like you for your expensive clothing or your money. And also, those things tend to make everyone look at your name brand or the expensive stuff that you wear. And that's not the type of person I want to present myself as, and it's not something I value, and I don't think it's something I want to project. I don't want to be known as that guy who's look at all this stuff I have, nor do I want to attract people who may or may not like me for just that stuff, and you can't tell. So that doesn't please me, that doesn't satisfy me at all. I don't want those people in my life. So I'm not going to do that. However, I do want to step far away from where I was before, which was this huge sense of horrendous fashion, huge baggy clothing, tennis shoes that made no sense but were shoes on my feet, and overly baggy or overly skinny jeans that sometimes didn't fit properly, but were jeans. to put on my naked body. So there's more to the story. My final goal is having a mature style sense. So not a high school-esque fashion sense. And I realized that my taste for what's right and wrong with fashion is not that great. I went to the mall um, a couple years ago, and okay, I've been going to the mall, and I haven't gone for quite a while, probably months, at least to buy clothing. And I remember finally spending a decent amount of money on clothing. And I would say over the last few years, I've spent a few $100s on clothing that I would never wear. And it was very high school-y clothing. So we're talking t-shirts with graphics on them. We're talking bright colors, bright blue, and a bunch of things that really just screams, okay, this is a guy in middle school or high school. However, I want to get to a more mature look. So what I mean by that is, it's hard to describe, but I'm doing research on it and looking at pictures of clothing that I would like, and just knowing where I want to go. So for instance, maybe a collared shirt like this, or solid colors, black, gray, charcoal, and maybe a lot of vests, Henleys, solid colored things, and a few stripes here and there and so forth. So let me give you an example of what I'm trying to steer away from. So this is a good example. So this is a bright blue hoodie, and it's by Zoo York, and they have this logo out front, and this is how it looks. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this is the type of clothing that my parents still recommend me. This was in fact a recent gift to me, and it's unfortunately not where I want to head right now. So you gotta keep that in mind and realize where you're going. Now, I've always, especially nowadays, been stingy with my money, and I've tried to, after definitely reading a lot of personal finance and investment and money books, I realized the importance of every dollar you save and so forth. So spending money on that stuff and devoting all this time to that stuff is outside of where I've been most of my life. When I used to think of girls on Pinterest who would spend hours just looking through fashion photos and clothing, and then they go on Instagram and do the same thing, I thought that was waste of time, unproductive, all this stuff. However, I'm starting to realize that there should be a certain standard of fashion that would be helpful to get to. And so I don't want to devote an excessive amount of time to this, but I do think moving in that direction can help. And the funny thing is, I realize now, tallying it up, I've spent a couple $100s in the past years, not recently, but in the past years, just going to the mall and saying, okay, my fashion sense sucks. I just want to buy one cheap thing under $40 that I can add to my wardrobe and maybe help myself. And it was kind of one of those situations where it was somewhat of a chicken with his head cut off, and he didn't know what to do, and he thought this looked nice, and then you buy it and it's horrible. And I still have all this stuff, and I can't return it because it's been years. And when you tally it all up, it's like $200, $300 of random things. And so understanding that, it may help you move in the right direction. And so again, this video was intended to maybe help you and guide you in the right direction. I do think there's plenty of resources on YouTube, on the internet, of very accomplished and knowledgeable fashion experts that can help you along in your journey. And again, you know, this is a guy who still, I don't want to devote an excessive amount of time to this or all that stuff. I'm not the type of person who really understands it when someone spends excessive amount of time just on buying clothing, because it really makes me wonder, like, well, are you spending all your money on clothing? Like, where's your mind at? Do you have passions, goals, drive, anything, or is it just like all your money that you make goes to clothing? And so uh, that's what I want to say, and thanks so much for watching. As always, if you like this video, leave it a like and hit the subscribe button for more videos. See you guys in the next video.